On today's show, we're going to be talking about one of the most controversial billionaires in the world, Mr. Mark Zuckerberg. As everyone knows, Mark is the founder of Facebook, and his personal net worth is estimated to be $61 billion. As Facebook continues to have its challenges with the public perception, the platform continues to generate significant cash flow. And on today's show, we cover some of the most interesting questions and answers that Mark has fielded lately. So, without further delay, here's our discussion on billionaire Mark Zuckerberg.
You are listening to The Investors Podcast, where we study the financial markets and read the books that influence self-made billionaires the most. We keep you informed and prepared for the unexpected.
Hey everyone, welcome to today's show at The Investors Podcast. I'm your host, Preston Pish, and as usual, I'm accompanied by my co-host, Stig Broderson. Like we said in the introduction, we're going to be covering the thoughts and ideas of Mr. Mark Zuckerberg today. So without further delay, we're going to cover the first question. And the first question that Mark was asked, what was the hardest part in the early years of Facebook? And this was Mark's response.
One of the hardest parts for me was actually when Yahoo offered to buy the company for a lot of money. Because up until that point, that was this turning point in the company where before that, every day we'd just come in and kind of do what we thought was the right next thing to do, right? We'd open to more schools, we opened beyond schools and launched more photos because that's what seemed like the next thing that we needed to do to help people express themselves and understand more what was going on around them. But then Yahoo came in with this really meaningful offer, $1 billion. We had 10 million people using the product at the time. It wasn't as if it were obvious that we were going to succeed far beyond that. And that was the first point where we really had to look at the future and say, wow, is what we're going to build going to actually be so much more meaningful for this? And, that caused a lot of interesting conversations in the company and with our investors. And, at the end of that, Dustin and I just decided, no, we think that we can actually go connect more than just the 10 million people who are in schools. We can go beyond that and have this really be a successful thing. And we just had to go for it. But that was really stressful because a lot of people really thought that we should sell the company. So for a lot of the folks who joined early on, they weren't really aligned with me, right? For them, they joined and being able to sell a company for $1 billion after a couple of years was like a home run. And it is a home run, right? And that's, I get that. I think that the fact that I didn't communicate very well about what we were trying to do caused this huge tension. And the part that was painful wasn't turning down the offer. It was the fact that after that, huge amounts of the company quit because they didn't believe in what we were doing.
This is a really interesting exchange. And while he was saying that, I kept thinking to myself, what would you have done in that situation? Immediately, I guess my first intuition was I would have definitely sold the company. But then I thought a little bit more about what the metrics would have looked like that he was seeing. And that's the thing about this kind of business is it's all, he can see everything in the numbers, right? It's all coming out. He can see the number of signups. He can see the dwell time on the site. He can see all of that stuff. But really interesting exchange. Stig, I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Facebook was founded back in February 2004. And Yahoo was not the first suitors, not the first of the string of suitors, really. Google, MySpace, for those of us who remember that, the Washington Post. There have been so many huge companies that were rumored to want to take over Facebook at the time. And probably the most talked about, that was Yahoo's offer in June 2006. If you look at some of the numbers, around 10 million users, that's a lot after just a little more than 2 years. They had around $20 million in revenue at the time. So it's not, on the metrics basis, obviously this was outrageous, and many people would say so. But it was a very interesting discussion I think he had with himself. At this point in time, Mark Zuckerberg was 22 years old. Think about saying no to that much money when you're that age. But perhaps that's also one of the reasons why he did say no. If you're 22 and you already had 10 million users on your platform, why wouldn't you just continue? And also think there is something to be said about being in a position when someone offers you $1 billion. If that happens, you probably do not need the money. For him, perhaps one of the things he was getting at was to have a chance to change the world, have a chance to test the new things on his platform. And you can test a lot more if you're the owner of Facebook than if you have $1 billion. At least that is, I think, what Mark Zuckerberg was thinking at the time. I guess from that perspective, it makes sense. It is interesting to consider, though, that Peter Thiel, one of the very first investors in Facebook, he tried to convince Zuckerberg to sell because for him it was all VC money. I don't know how many X he would make on that investment, but yeah, why wouldn't you say yes? But for Zuckerberg, obviously, he was more the visionary, not the money behind Facebook.
I think a lot of the venture capital investors would have been providing so much pressure on the sale. I don't know that a lot of them would have been wanting to kind of hang around and see how well 22-year-old Mark Zuckerberg would have done as he grows the business.